Well, good morning, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed for joining us for the second high-level dialogue of this week. My name's David Eads. I'm from BBC World News, and I'm moderating this particular session for you. It's risk-informed public and private investments. And I suppose as a very brief introduction, of course, any investment in urban development is riven with potential in both directions. It can create, it can amplify, or it can reduce the levels of future risk. And this session is really about achieving the most positive outcomes through public and private sector investments, avoiding what we would call short-termism, avoiding wherever possible blindness to risk. So we're going to be looking at some very specific approaches, progress achieved since Sendai, of course. We hope to be bringing you some well-informed, risk-informed investment practices and solutions and methods for risk identification. We will also face up to the hurdles, the challenges and the barriers that lie in the way of this work. Just to give you an idea as to how we'll run the session, I'm going to ask each of our speakers to talk for about 5 minutes about their particular perspective. We have 2 government ministers, we have 2 representatives from the private sector, 1 representing the Global Compact, and we have a perspective on the importance of technology, of satellite technology in particular, and the powers of communication for informing risk as well. So you will get the full panoply of views from them. And then we're going to open into a discussion of sorts, as I'd like to just put 1 or 2 key points to each of our speakers before we will turn to you and offer an opportunity for questions from the floor, by which time we are going to be getting close to wrapping up and concluding this session in an hour and a half from now. So thank you for being with us. Let me introduce our 5 speakers, if I could, first of all. Coming from closest to me and coming from Zambia is Honourable Sylvia Chalikosa, who's a minister in the office of the Vice President of Zambia, and has been since 2016, where she oversees the operations of the Disaster Management and Mitigations Unit. Sylvia is an accountant by training, a member of the National Assembly, of course, and has also worked on the National Security Committee and the Foreign Affairs Committee. Mr. Isidoro Santana is the Minister of the Economy, Planning and Development in the Dominican Republic, an expert in internal taxation. He was the General Coordinator of the project for strengthening the tax sector for the Dominican Republic. He is also a member of the Academy of Sciences, a college professor in macroeconomics, public finances and accounts. Sandra Wu may be a familiar face to many of you. She is a member, among other things, of the UN Global Compact Board and is going to be speaking on behalf of the Global Compact to you this morning. She is, of course, also the chair and CEO of Kokusai Kogyo, the co-founder and director of the Japan Asia Group, and a board member of the UNISDR Private Sector Alliance for Disaster Resilient Societies, as you will know it as ARISE. She was the DRR champion at the UN Third World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in 2015 and is also a member of the World Economic Forum's Alliance of Climate CEO Leaders. Mr. Hans See is the chair of the executive committee of SM Prime Holdings in the Philippines. This is one of the largest integrated property development companies and developers in Southeast Asia. SM Prime has a reputation for creating innovative, sustainable lifestyle cities, bringing together and integrating malls, office space, homes, hotels, convention centres among them. Mr. See is also the chair of the China Banking Corporation and chair of the National University and also sits on the global board of ARISE. And finally, Dr. Hiroshi Yamakawa is the president of the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, that's JAXA. He's served in the Cabinet Office as a member of the Committee on National Space Policy and has also been visiting scientist at both NASA and the European Space Agency. Our panel, ladies and gentlemen, for the course of this session. And I would like to turn straight away to Minister Santana. Thank you very much for being with us. The Minister will speak in Spanish, so if you need your headsets, be aware now. And I just want to get a bit of focus on the Latin American network for climate change and disaster risk reduction, and the work that that network has been doing in integrating disaster risk reduction in public investment planning. It's quite a major undertaking. It's been running for quite some time now, Minister. Perhaps you could explain more. Thank you.
Bueno, muchas gracias y muy complacido de compartir este espacio con ustedes, con mis colegas. Comienzo por contarles que la República Dominicana es un país que está enclavado en una isla de la cuenca del Caribe. Comparte la isla con la República de Haití en un territorio superpoblado que aloja más de 20 millones de habitantes en apenas unos 72,000 kilómetros cuadrados, con todas las implicaciones que ello tiene en términos de asentamientos humanos, de medio ambiente y de riesgos de desastre. Aún con todo ello, estamos en una zona del mundo muy expuesta a los riesgos de desastres. No solo a los de carácter sísmico, que son impredecibles, pero que suelen ocurrir, y no hace mucho tiempo en nuestra propia isla tuvo lugar uno de los más terribles terremotos que conoce la época moderna, pero que ocurrió del lado de Haití y para suerte de los dominicanos afectó muy poco a la parte del territorio dominicano, pero son mucho más frecuentes los fenómenos agroclimatológicos. Igualmente pasan con frecuencia ciclones tropicales, lo mismo que épocas de intensas lluvias e inundaciones, alternados con otros periodos de sequías extremas, que normalmente producen daños para las vidas humanas, la integridad física de la gente, como también para la infraestructura y para la economía. Nunca estaremos bien preparados para enfrentar los desastres y también, para suerte de los dominicanos, desde hace 20 años no nos pasa un ciclón de gran magnitud, a pesar de que, al igual que el terremoto de Haití, han pasado huracanes tropicales muy cercanos a nosotros, incluyendo dos que pasaron en secuencia por todo el Caribe y arrasaron a Puerto Rico, que está muy cerca de nosotros, y que afectaron a muchísimas de las islas del Caribe con daños catastróficos. En la República Dominicana, sin embargo, lo que hemos visto más en tiempos relativamente recientes son periodos de intensas lluvias que producen muchos daños a la población, a la infraestructura y a la agricultura, también a los servicios públicos, o bien épocas de intensa sequía, de lo cual hemos sido víctimas en los últimos 2 años, que también producen efectos dañinos a la economía y a la población, incluyendo limitaciones para la disposición de agua para el consumo humano, que ya es la etapa más severa de una sequía. Se estima que por lo menos en más de 50 años el país pierde entre medio punto o un 1% del PIB, del Producto Interno Bruto, en remediar los efectos de los fenómenos naturales. Y cada 20 años aproximadamente nos afecta a algunos que produce pérdidas por más del 2% del producto. Para eso, el gobierno tiene que hacer un esfuerzo no solo de remediación, sino de preparación. Y uno de los aspectos en que más énfasis hemos venido poniendo es el de la inversión pública en infraestructura resiliente. Mucho nos ha ayudado la red latinoamericana de sistemas nacionales de inversiones públicas, que es un espacio donde nuestros gobiernos, a través de sus direcciones de inversión pública, pues coordinan, comparten experiencias, coordinan fórmulas para lograr sistemas de inversión pública que vayan más acorde con la generación de infraestructura que pueda prepararnos para superar situaciones de catástrofe, pero al mismo tiempo para asegurarnos que con los limitados recursos que tienen nuestros gobiernos para inversión pública, pues se pueda sacar el mayor provecho posible.
Minister, thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you for that. Phone on, please. Thank you. Minister, thank you very much. And we will use our discussion time to look at how that works in practice, the illustration of what the network has achieved, because there are some very striking illustrative examples that we can draw on there. Thank you very much. I'd like to turn straight away then to another continent, similar problems in many ways. Sylvia Chazakoza, thank you very much. So do please give us the backstory from your perspective.
Thank you very much. You may wish to note that Zambia is located in the central part of Southern Africa. It's a landlocked country and it has 9 neighboring countries surrounding it. So in an effort to open it up, we have embarked upon massive infrastructure development. So this topic of private and public investment is quite important to the country of Zambia. I'd like to thank the government of federal government of Switzerland for the warm welcome and hospitality accorded to all the delegates. And I would like from the onset to mention that Zambia still experiences a number of hazards, especially climate change related hazards, and in particular those relating to agriculture, namely droughts and floods, and pest infestation, as well as man-made hazards to deal with car accidents and bus accidents and such things. The climate change and variability has equally made it more difficult to predict the behavior of hazards. For example, currently our country is experiencing prolonged dry spells that have affected more than half the country, while the other part has been affected by floods. And this directly threatens food security. Therefore, the need to enhance integrated disaster risk management is of paramount importance if Zambia is to protect its citizens and assets from adverse effects of disaster risks. And in order to deal with these risks, the country has put in place several disaster risk management measures or strategies which are aimed at addressing Target E of the Sendai framework. Distinguished delegates, since the adoption of the Sendai framework, my government, in collaboration with other stakeholders, in line with global aspirations, has domesticated the Sendai framework through the development of the National Disaster Risk Management Framework 2017 to 2030, in addition to many other documentation to allow for the legal framework for us to operationalize what we need to do to inform our country, its citizens, of the need to be risk conscious, disaster risk conscious. Other documents include the Disaster Management Act of 2010, the National Disaster Management Policy 2015, Disaster Management Operations Manual for the users 2015, the Africa Program of Action for the Implementation of the Sendai Framework 2015 to 2030, the SADC, which is the Southern African Development Community Disaster Preparedness and Response Strategy Fund 2016 to 2030, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, and the Sustainable Development Goals. So what we're trying to do is speaking to all the policy direction of all these documents that I have just mentioned. The National Disaster Risk Management Framework also feeds into our 7th National Development Plan of our country to ensure that the aim of the National Disaster Risk Management, which is to enhance the implementation capacity and capability of the country to significantly reduce vulnerability and contribute to resilience and sustainable development. And through this, the country intends to have substantial reduction of disaster risks and losses in lives, livelihoods, and health, and in the economic, physical, social, cultural, and environmental assets of persons, businesses, and communities. The framework also outlines the guiding principles, the priority areas, the annual targets, the outcome indicators, and program activities. To facilitate the monitoring of the global targets and indicators in the Sendai framework, which are well articulated in our national framework, my government is utilizing the disaster loss database to capture information relating to economic loss, affected people, damaged critical infrastructure, livelihoods, disruption, mortality, early warning systems, and investment in the disaster risk management, just to mention a few. Further, in order to monitor the implementation of the Sendai framework, the country has been part of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction online Sendai Framework Monitoring Systems, SFM, launched in March 2018. And this online monitoring is being done in collaboration with the regional economic commissions, such as the SADC, Southern African Development Community. And the country so far has held workshops to take stock of the populations. And my country is also working with the African Union in implementing the program. This is all without challenges. We have challenges in data availability in a usable manner. We have challenges in collecting such data. We also have inadequate insurance cover for hazards such as floods. And in this vein, I would like to urge cooperating partners, especially at the regional level, to set up a fund to assist affected countries, especially with lessons learned from the Cyclone Idai, which affected a number of countries in Southern Africa. Mr. Moderator, in conclusion, I would like to state that my country is fully committed to the implementation of the Sendai framework together with the 2030 agenda for a sustainable development. Thank you.
Minister, thank you very much indeed for that. I'm just going to move the clicker on to Hans C., who is going to offer you a perspective from Arise. Are you okay with that, Hans? Okay, fine. So the floor is yours. Hans, thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. Esteemed delegate, again, good morning. It is an honor to address this audience on highlighting risk-informed public and private investments as a means towards resilience. I would like to thank Ms. Mami Mizutori for inviting me to this year's global platform. Our company, SM Prime Holding Incorporated, is one of the largest integrated property developers in Southeast Asia. We aim to create innovative and sustainable lifestyle cities. As a major player in our country's property sector, I have made it our advocacy to invest in risk-informed resilience. The Philippines, due to its geographical location, is very prone to natural disaster, most notable of which in recent years were Typhoon Haiyan in 2013, which caused our GDP to dip from 7.7% to 6.5%. And Typhoon Mangkhut in 2018 has triggered damages up to nearly $1 billion, largely in the agricultural sector. Drivers of risk in our countries are as follows: rapid urbanization, increasing population, poor building standards, and lack of tools and financial capability for science-based solutions. I believe in the age-old adage, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. SM Prime shifted early on from managing disaster to managing risk. I would like to share 3 platforms on risk-informed investments. Platform number 1, investment in infrastructure for SM malls. Allow me to illustrate this as follows. First is the Mall of Asia complex, built on an elevation of 3 meters over the regular requirement to protect against storm surges and flooding. Second is SM Marikina, built on stilts after considering the 100 years flood cycles of the locale. Third, SM Masinags and 20 of our other newer malls. We built these with huge rainwater catchment basins to hold back floodwaters. These platforms have provided positive impacts. To name a few, we are open to serve the community and public during extreme calamities. The local government of Marikina has adopted a city ordinance in 2014 that mandated the stilts design for buildings in low-lying areas. We averted major sales loss for our stakeholders, including our tenants, among others. Platform number 2, capacity building and collaboration. Through Arise Philippines and the National Resilience Council, as lead partners, we continue to promote capacity building among the private sector. We put up a resilience center that includes data storage facilities and a backup operations center. We introduce BCP workshops and partners with academe and NGOs in capacity building. Together with our country's Office of Civil Defense, we initiated Incident Command Center, or the ICS, and we actively supported DRR-led programs as a forum, workshop, and nationwide drills. Platform number 3, public-private partnership in the national, regional, and global levels. On a national level, in collaboration with government, we are proud partners of the National Resilience Council, or the NRC, which focuses on LGU's resilience. On a regional level, we are in partnership with APEC Emergency Preparedness Capacity Building Centers. We also continue to work with UNDRR Bangkok and JETI for DRR programs. On a global level, we promote and support ARISE work theme commitments in DRM strategies, education, training, and urban resilience. SM Prime places crucial importance on risk-informed investments. It allows us to serve our communities better, to increase our value, to be an asset to the government, and of course, to continue our business successfully. In this day and age, whether for small or medium or large enterprises, risk resilience and disaster preparedness definitely make for good business. Thank you.
Very much indeed for that. And as a natural liaison from that, I'm going to turn to Sandra now. Sandra, to tell us a bit about the Global Compact, how it works, but also your views as to the extent to which the economic value that comes from sustainable businesses is being understood and is being picked up. But over to you.
Thank you. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to participate in this platform and participate in this discussion as a board member of United Nations Global Compact and as a CEO. Mr. Xi just gave an excellent example of risk-informed investment by a single corporate entity. And in my quick introduction of UN Global Compact, I will talk about how the Global Compact works on DRR and the resilience, and also how we work to scale risk-informed investment among the wider private sector. As you know, the UN Global Compact was founded in 2000 by the late Secretary General Kofi Annan, and it is now the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative. We have over 9,000 participant companies and local networks in 68 countries. And the Compact is a multi-stakeholder initiative connecting business, government, UN, and the civil society around the private sector's contribution to sustainable development. The basis of UN Global Compact is a set of 10 principles for responsible business in the areas of environment, human rights, labor, and anti-corruption. And all of our participants commit to those principles. And we then help companies use those principles as a framework for their contribution toward the sustainable development goals. And in the Sendai framework approved in 2015, actually UN Global Compact is tasked with the responsibility to further engage with and promote the critical importance of disaster risk reduction for sustainable development and resilience as the main United Nations initiative for engagement with the private sector and the business. The Global Compact fulfills the Sendai Framework mandate through their work on climate. The UN Climate Action Summit will be held during UN General Assembly Week in September this year. And the UN Global Compact's main role in the summit will be in driving business ambition and innovation. This work is closely aligned with our climate action platform, so-called Pathways to Low Carbon and Resilient Development. But too often, the discussion in the climate space have focused predominantly on opportunity for mitigation. And the Paris Agreement laid out a global goal on adaptation. And to achieve it, we need to break down the silos and change the presumption that adaptation and the resilience activity are independent from mitigation, and highlight the urgency of the task at hand and the important role for business. And Global Compact will also push for risk-informed investment through our another action platform called Financial Innovation for the SDGs. We found that 80% of our participating companies are already taking action on the SDGs, especially in the goals around climate. And yet, there's still a funding gap for the SDGs. It is estimated that achieving the SDGs by 2030 will require roughly $5 to $7 trillion of annual investment. But we have a $2.5 trillion gap annually, and each year we fail to close the gap. The price tag grows. The Financial Innovation Action Platform we have is a way we work with both companies and investors to accelerate actions and find ways to close the gap. We work to encourage companies to become more resilient and sustainable, and we also work with the investor on how to recognize those that are resilient and sustainable. The intent is to scale the existing good practice so that the private sector can reach tipping points on sustainable development, disaster risk reduction, and the climate action. I will stop here. Thank you.
Sandra, thank you very much indeed, and for giving us a chance to reflect in a minute on some of those huge challenges. You pointed out the funding gaps are massive. Let's get a perspective now, though, on the way in which technology is more than playing its part here. The development of JAXA's disaster-related satellite applications are clearly contributing to disaster risk management. The way in which they're doing that is going to be explained to you now by Hiroshi Yamakawa. Hiroshi, over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Moderator. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude and compliments to the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction and also to the government of Switzerland for organizing this wonderful session. Well, today I would like to share with you disaster management activities led by Japan using satellite data. Well, our global agenda, Sendai Framework for Disaster Reduction, was established through the 2015 Third United Nations World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction, held in Sendai, Japan, co-organized by the government of Japan and UNDRR. Well, Sendai Framework considers space technologies as its integral element for disaster management activities, and specifically space-based technology is clearly stated in the Priority 1 of the Sendai Framework. Well, speaking of the characteristics of satellites, among many other alternative infrastructures, only satellites can provide information on wide areas affected by disasters. Around the clock, all night long, irrespective of weather conditions or the disaster itself. Therefore, satellite images can be effectively utilized for disaster management activities. For this purpose, close collaboration between space agencies and users, including disaster management authorities, is crucial. In this regard, in Japan, JAXA has collaborated and conducted joint activities with users. This collaboration has contributed to having users understand the value of satellite images for disaster management, and thus the use of satellite images has been included in the official disaster management documents in Japan, at the national government level as well as the local government level. This achievement of Japan is expected to be a good leading example for many other countries in newly establishing strategic disaster management plans. JAXA is mandated to develop, launch, and operate satellites as part of its key activity pillars. JAXA provides disaster management users with information in the form of damage maps generated from satellite images. Disaster management users utilize the information to recognize the status of the affected area, plan evacuation, and conduct rescue and support activities. For more than a decade, JAXA has contributed to providing satellite images from ALOS, which means Advanced Land Observation Satellite, and ALOS-2 satellites in response to a total of 651 requests from 76 countries and regions. In the case of major devastating disasters, it often takes several weeks to recognize the entire situation of damages caused by such disasters. In this regard, satellites have great advantages because satellite images can be provided at shortest within 24 hours and on average 3 days after requests are made. Now I would like to move on to space-based international cooperation for disaster management activities. A good example I would like to highlight is Sentinel Asia. Sentinel Asia is an international cooperation platform in which space community, data analysis support community, international community, and disaster management community collaborate on a voluntary basis to support disaster management activities in the Asia-Pacific region. As the Executive Secretariat of Sentinel Asia platform, JAXA has been leading this project together with the Asian Disaster Reduction Center, ADRC, of Japan. Since its establishment in 2006, Sentinel Asia has conducted emergency responses to natural disasters in the Asia-Pacific region. Recently, Sentinel Asia members have been jointly addressing not only the emergency response phase, but also the mitigation, preparedness, and recovery phases of the disaster management cycle. Let me briefly introduce the emergency operation flow of Sentinel Asia. When natural disasters occur, users make emergency observation requests to the reception desk, ADRC. After clarification as to needs of the users, the requests are sent to space agencies. Then space agencies contribute satellite images, and the satellite images are turned into damage maps by data analysis support organizations and are finally provided to users. In this Sentinel Asia platform, many space agencies from various countries and regions in Asia contribute satellite images. For over a decade, Sentinel Asia has responded to approximately 300 requests in the case of natural disasters in the Asia-Pacific region. Now I would like to share with you a recent good example of Sentinel Asia's disaster management support. Last autumn, a huge earthquake hit Indonesia, followed by devastating tsunamis. In response to a request from a disaster management organization of Indonesia, Sentinel Asia conducted emergency satellite observation. In this case, satellite images and damage maps provided Sentinel Asia was shared within the Army Central Command Station and were used for effective evacuation in the largely affected urban areas. So far, Sentinel Asia has provided disaster management users with more than 1,000 damage maps for various types of natural disasters. I believe the key to success is close collaboration with disaster management users. JAXA will continue to support disaster management activities in the Asia-Pacific region by using space technologies together with Sentinel Asia members. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Hiroshi, thank you very much indeed for laying out and showing some of the ways in which the speed of satellite communication has an immediate impact. So I just want to go around the houses again for a moment now to draw out some of the issues which I think have been raised by our speakers. And I'd like to start with you, Minister Santana. You mentioned towards the end of your address the Latin American Network for Climate Change and Disaster Risk Reduction and the way in which it is working on those issues of investing in disaster risk reduction. Now, I think most people think of DRR in a risk to disaster. obviously. It feels here that the Latin American network is much more multi-layered. It's a more comprehensive project, and you have some specific examples with La Barquita, for example, which perhaps you could just outline a little bit and illustrate how this all comes together.
Sí, muchas gracias. En general, los países de América Latina tenemos un serio problema con la infraestructura. Tenemos infraestructura insuficiente e ineficiente y sobre todo tenemos una muy baja capacidad de inversión pública, hasta el punto de que se esperaría que en este momento cada uno de nuestros países debería estar destinando por lo menos un 6% de su GDP a la inversión pública, y los estándares regionales andan en torno a un 2%. Eso obviamente nos obliga primero a buscar fórmulas para fortalecer las finanzas públicas, para fortalecer la capacidad de nuestros gobiernos de recaudar impuestos para disponer de más recursos para esto, pero utilizar con la máxima eficiencia posible los escasos recursos que tenemos. Para ello se crearon los sistemas nacionales de inversión pública, que fueron un paso de avance para lograr una mayor racionalidad y efectividad de las inversiones públicas. Y a partir del año 2010 se creó la Red Latinoamericana y del Caribe de Sistemas Nacionales de Inversión Pública. Realmente la red ha sido un espacio muy importante para nuestra región, porque nos ha permitido compartir experiencias de cómo hacer mejor las cosas, de cómo podemos lograr el uso de las redes de tecnología para que la inversión pública se pueda realizar con mayor eficiencia, con el mayor impacto y al menor costo posible. En esa red se suelen llevar a cabo reuniones periódicas. La última reunión tuvo lugar justamente en la ciudad de Santo Domingo hace apenas unos días, donde se discuten y se intercambia información sobre metodologías para la formulación y evaluación de los proyectos de la inversión pública, sistemas informáticos que faciliten la operatividad de los mismos y faciliten la toma de decisiones, normas técnicas y procedimientos que ordenen el accionar de la gestión, la inversión pública, y programas de capacitación para nuestros funcionarios en esta materia. Esto ha sido de mucha ayuda para nuestros países, de modo de garantizar un uso más eficiente de los limitados recursos que solemos tener. Una cosa que tenemos gran parte de los países de América Latina es un serio problema de cohesión territorial, y son tan grandes nuestra carencia de servicios y de infraestructura que normalmente en algunos grandes proyectos que usualmente son atraídos por los sectores más urgentes o por las ciudades más grandes, dejan fuera muchas inversiones que deberían estar llamadas a resolver problemas cotidianos de las poblaciones más pequeñas, que normalmente coincide con los lugares donde existen los mayores niveles de pobreza. También eso nos ha ayudado bastante, pero sobre todo para darle garantía a la población de que las inversiones que hace el Estado cumplan con una serie de condiciones de garantía de calidad, de resistencia, de preparación frente a los fenómenos externos, sobre todo aquellos vinculados con el cambio climático. Se han venido llevando a cabo proyectos importantes en las riberas de los ríos de algunas ciudades de saneamiento y de reasentamientos humanos, proyectos de protección de cuencas hidrográficas y construcción de presas y control de los caudales, cosas de ese tipo, pero todo lo que hagamos con los limitados recursos todavía no nos garantiza que vamos a estar debidamente preparados. Cada vez estamos mejor preparados para los fenómenos naturales. Y en el caso de las inversiones privadas, porque normalmente frente a fenómenos sísmicos, la única garantía que podemos tener es reglamentaciones fuertes y bien aplicadas que garanticen que no solo las inversiones públicas, sino también las inversiones privadas se hagan cumpliendo una serie de parámetros que deben ser respetadas para por lo menos garantizar cierta resiliencia, y en eso también es algo en lo que hemos venido trabajando. Muchas gracias.
Minister, thanks very much indeed. That feeds fairly directly into, you talk about the scarcity of resource, which everyone recognizes. Minister, Zambia has that problem as well, of course, but it's interesting you say how disaster risk issues feed into the national plan, and I just wonder, where does it fit in that national plan? Because you could talk about issues of poverty alleviation and other vulnerabilities. Disaster is where in the scale?
Thank you very much for that. Yes, we were making reference to the need for disaster risk awareness. And one of the things that we're doing is to mainstream the information that we get around disaster risk management within the different sectors, sectors like agriculture, the Ministry of Lands, where we're looking at the issues of land use planning, especially when you come to building and farming in the wetlands and areas which are recharge areas. We've experienced that some of the buildings that are, constructed on recharge water areas are taking the water away, so we are losing that resource of water. We've had road construction where drainage systems have not been put in place. We are addressing that through the revision of our building codes and building standards. Most of our rural areas are still with housing made of mud and poles. We're upgrading that to more climate resilient standards, and we have experienced a number of very strong winds that have resulted in blown off roofs. So in construction generally, we are trying to mainstream the area of making people aware that should this happen, the likely effect will be infrastructure damage. And we're trying to introduce that in our curriculum so that children become aware of the environment at a very young age. And where we have building contractors, we're also encouraging them to use the Sendai policy of build back better, You may be aware that we had some infernos.
Sorry to interrupt there. Are they listening to that?
Well, it's a continued effort. Yes, I think so. We're making every effort to engage them at community level as well as ward level, which are the lowest units of our governance structure. So it's a continued effort, and we need to come together and share knowledge of experiences that we've had. Some of them have actually gone through the experience, though they have no choice but to listen. And others who are at risk are also being informed to be aware of that.
You mentioned also that the lack of insurance cover. You mentioned the paucity of the data that you receive. It feels as if you are on the back foot in so many areas. You could talk about education and at school level and perhaps filtering through a better awareness, but what about the decision makers within private sector and public sector today?
Well, this is where platforms of this nature come in handy, because from a meeting of this sort, you are able to network and get the players that you need to address these issues together. Private sector normally want to work with governments, whether the government has the capacity to pay them or not. But it's very interesting because the government is the biggest employer. So we have no choice but to engage with others who want to bring investment into the country. And it's incumbent upon the government to have the information for risk investment readily available. So we need to look at the technology, as was explained by our colleague from, is it Japan?
Yes.
Yes.
Jackson,
yes, we need to incorporate that in our investment portfolio so that such companies are invited to help us evaluate the level of risk that we have, depending on the investment that people want to embark upon. For instance, some of the infrastructure that we build is grant aid, so we have no say on the standards of the materials that are used. But now, being part of the global family, which is promoting Building Back Better, we can insist on certain standards, and as a result, as I mentioned earlier, we have revised the building codes. And this equally has to be translated into the local level, so that people are not just building with any material, but they're building something that's climate resilient.
And needs to be monitored after the event.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Minister, thank you very much for that. Hans, I want to turn to you because there was the call there about governments have to work with private sector. Private sector must work with governments. We know that. I get a feeling from you in a way, but part of your frustration is getting private sector to recognise the sorts of things perhaps that you are doing as a matter of course, but you're in an industry which it's about profit and loss, and that's a very, very difficult barrier to overcome.
Yeah, it is understandable that the private sector, of course, the number one thing is their bottom line. I know I went through a lot with them. Let me share with you, I didn't really come into this investment by looking into the numbers. It is also an experience, it's a very sad experience we went through in the late 80s. And that brought about me telling everyone that the companies got to do something to avoid these kind of experiences. So that went on from being very aware of fire, went into environment, and then going into environment disasters, and that brought me where we are today. Actually, there is no hard written rules on how much we should be investing in resilience, but I gave myself a 10%. I know I went through a lot of issues with
10%
of the investments, of our total investment into resilience investments. Actually, that 10% came from, in any project costs, we always have these 10% contingencies. And with that, I tried to keep everything within their budget so I could freely use the contingency. That was in the beginning.
But look, there are going to be vast parts of the construction industry around the world that go 10%, you've got to be joking. How do you persuade them that is money well spent on a long-term basis?
In the beginning, I know I had to go through a lot of of these things. But I kept on reminding me, I am working within the budget, so please leave me alone. I will be able to deliver.
So you're not looking at it as social responsibility, you're looking at it on a business level.
No, more of a preventive move that I feel that nobody should go through the sad experience that I went through. So having said that, moving on, I don't know if I should say luckily or I would always say God forbid, the thing we don't want to happen did happen. And that kind of put me, or gave me so much brownie points, put me on top of the whole management and said, well, what you did is right. You see, what happened was we had a couple of incidents already, like the Marikina I showed and the Mall of Asia complex I showed. Hadn't I do those investments, we would have been affected a lot. So it kind of gave me my payback on what I did. So since then, I started using the 10%, and I got the support of, well, management, stakeholders, and investors. And most especially, it really gave me a lot of images, good images with the public.
I mean, you have a good story to tell there, but there are also, I know, concerns that you have within the Philippines in particular about some communities which are simply not getting the recognition perhaps needed in terms of risk-informed investment. And I don't know, is it a time bomb?
No, that's the next stage I'm really trying to work now that through the NRC, our National Resilience Council, I'm able to work together with the government sectors. The issue that I have really behind my head is really the informal settlers, the poor sectors of the Philippines. You see, I do believe there are about 4.5 million informal settlers in the whole Philippines, and 3 million of them, or more than 3 million of them, are in Metro Manila. So, well, it goes to show because all the business are really in Metro Manila, so most of them would really go there. And my biggest fear really is the security risk around it. I know the government is really trying to do something about it, and I really believe that I should also get the private sector involved into helping address that situation.
It may be interesting to see what's happening in La Barquita as an example of dealing with informal settlements as well. Hans, thank you very much indeed for that.
Thank you.
Sandra, let me come to you then. You made a point in your opening remarks, just again it's about money, but that funding gap you pointed out. I mean, it was almost like it was a two-track story. 80% of private sector get it. You know, they're buying into issues of sustainability that really matter. That's the future, and yet the funding gap is vast, and that is a barrier. I don't know. How do you overcome that?
Thank you, David. That's a very big question. Yes, I mentioned that we have an urgent need to accelerate actions and find ways to close the gaps. But one thing we must know that we have to do it right. We have to consider, we have to do it as a risk-informed, we have to integrate SDGs, climate action, disaster risk reduction into our decision-making. But what happened in the business world now? So where are we now after 2015? Well, at the Global Compact, we are seeing that investor community is placing a greater emphasis on sustainability than ever before. And the total value of ESG asset today, ESG asset, which I mean is some asset that's kind of environmental, social, governance oriented, is around $30 trillion US. But this number has been growing substantially as evidence increasingly shows that ESG risks are financially material and have a real impact on investment performance. So companies actually are conduit between the investors and the real economy where SDGs-related impact actually take place. So it is very essential that they play their part in ensuring that this growth in sustainable finance asset translates to better social and environmental outcome. And these days, investors are demanding more and more data on how companies are addressing the issues identified in the SDGs. So for example, the Global Compact works very closely with our sister organization, the Principle for Responsible Investment, or PRI. Climate change is the highest priority ESG issues facing investors. And PRI is working to help investors protect portfolio from climate risk and to expose them to opportunity in the shift to a low-carbon global economy. Another is TCFD, Task Force for Climate-Related Finance Disclosure. Is another mechanism meant to accelerate transparency. I know here the climate risk includes the disaster risk. So increasingly, to attract investment, also and satisfy, like Hansi say, satisfy our shareholders, stakeholders, companies need to pay attention to their environment, social, and the governance, and also risk. And we have launched a new sustainable finance strategy focusing on corporate SDG finance to engage our more than 9,000 corporate members and unlock the significant potential by guiding and helping companies align with their business strategy and the corporate finance with the SDGs. But having said that, financing is just only one crucial aspect of this push. But in it can only be accelerated as sustainable through increasing transparency in reporting and the metrics. These are just two sides of the same coin. So we are moving towards a world of radical transparency. So accurate, positive impact reporting will create a cycle that helps leading company attract investors. And this will have the end result of driving more and more financing towards delivering the SDGs and, of course, the Sendai framework. So in terms of challenge, I think the issue now is not of barriers, but of speed. So companies can choose either to, proactive and set the agenda in this space with by working with groups such as Global Compact or ARISE, or to let the agenda be decided for them by investors, government, regulators, and auditors. But we see many companies are choosing to be proactive, and Global Compact working on tools, research, and and guidances to help decision makers incorporate an SDGs lens into their corporate strategy and to accelerate this process. Government, regulators, and auditors can also make a difference in insisting on accurate, positive impact reporting. And this will have the end result of driving more and more financing toward delivering the SDGs, disaster risk, climate action.
One last quick question for you. From Sendai to now, I mean, you're talking about the need for speed. Are you seeing, what sort of acceleration are you seeing in terms of appreciation of the need for this sort of risk-informed investment?
From the private sector perspective, I do see the change in these 4 years. First, we don't need to just focus on creating the awareness. Now this day, the private sector, well, I don't know whether it's proper to say that due to this keep on and recurring natural disaster and this big impact, private sector knows they need to do something. So this is the big change. And the other is, after 6 years back to this place, I do see this community, DRR community, and not just only the DRR community, but also the sustainability and the climate, we all come together. And private sector has been recognized which is the big difference as 6 years ago. And we are part of this community. So I think we do have the responsibility to work together with the community to bring this to the next step.
Sandra, thank you very much indeed. Hiroshi, I want to come to you with a couple of thoughts, actually. The first one, you mentioned Indonesia last year and the role that your satellite communications was able to play and provide. Can I ask you, in your experience, though, technology moves very fast. You can provide that communication very quickly. Do you feel that the authorities on the ground are yet in tune with the speed with which you can move? I mean, are they responding quick enough?
Well, thank you very much for your difficult question. I think, yes, it depends. It depends on the situation, or it depends on the disaster, it depends on the nations or regions. And, well, I think, as I mentioned in my statement, JAXA has supported disaster management activities in case of natural disasters in many countries and regions. And as I said, we have seen cases in which satellite images were practically used in the affected areas, but not for all cases. But now, as I see a distinguished panelist from the Philippines sitting next to me, Mr. Hans C., I would like to take this opportunity to highlight a good example in the Philippines, based on the Sentinel-Asia's framework. Well, the original focus of Sentinel-Asia was the emergency response phase. But Sentinel-Asia has also come to address preparedness and mitigation phases, as I said. And in this context, as part of Sentinel-Asia's activities, JAXA has supported and collaborated with disaster management authorities of the Philippines in building a pilot landslides early warning system using precipitation data acquired by satellites. And we have jointly demonstrated the efficacy or efficiency of the pilot system for landslide early warning system, and in several areas in the Philippines. And as I have been informed, the Philippines authorities are planning to make investments in order to build and practically use this system, early warning system, in broader areas in the Philippines. So this is, I think, one of the very good examples to actually responding to the current, the most updated space technologies. But as I said, the challenge is we have to, I would say, co-design or co-work with the actual user management, disaster management users. And I think that that's the current big challenge for us.
And that's an issue of education as well, isn't it?
Yes.
For awareness of the value.
I think that's why I'm here today. Right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Educate. One last point, with your expertise in technology and science and space technology, can I just ask you about the speed of improvement of this sort of service? I mean, do you look to the near future with great confidence that an awful lot more yet can be achieved and delivered to countries as they are still learning to become more aware of what you do?
Well, I think, well, today I talked about the Sentinel-Asia framework, and currently there are members from 8 countries and regions. But there are more a larger community like International Disaster Charter, where about 30 countries or nations belong to. So right now, until about 10 years or 15 years ago, there were only half of them. But recently, the numbers of contributors are increasing. So 10 years, double. So that's the speed of the growing community right now.
Which is a good sign, obviously.
Yes.
Hiroshi, thank you very much indeed. Thank you to all the panel for the moment. We have an opportunity for some questions from you, from the floor. And actually, first of all, I'm going to get just a remark from Aris Papadopoulos, who is with us. Aris, you have a perspective from the construction industry. You could just inform us a little bit, remind us who you are, and make your point. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I've been involved in the RISE network since its inception. This is my 5th global platform, And I think I'm allowed to stir a little bit the pot here. Unfortunately, throughout the history here, we don't have the presence of the people, the segment of our economy that's creating the risk. We have a lot of people who are observing the risk and trying to measure it and evaluate it. We have a lot of people who are responding to the events, but the risk is created in development. And I applaud the panel, and particularly Hans C., who has firsthand is an enlightened example of that. But we have to recognize, if we're going to solve the bigger problem, that there is a darker side to this. And I like to say that hazards are predictable, but are sometimes unpredictable, but market behavior is predictable. And where there is profit, there will be development. Unfortunately, what we're observing is that the most vulnerable, the most destruction, is in the residential and light commercial segment of our communities, the built environment. And a big part of that is actually built on a speculative perspective. SM Prime that Mr. C represents is a long-term builder-owner. They have a different perspective. But a lot of our development is built on a short-term basis, essentially resold within 3 years. And basically the profit motive there is to build vulnerably. And so a lot of our destruction really is driven by that. Land is a factor. We've run out of the good land. The good land is far away. There's no good roads to bring people to work. So people have to settle and build in the vulnerable locations, the floodplains, the earthquake-prone areas, which increases our risk. But also what we do in terms of permits, lending, insurance, essentially doesn't discriminate whether you're building something to a higher standard or you're building vulnerably. So we've not achieved that yet in our system. And I kind of want to ask the panel, what can we do to make speculative development less profitable and make resilient, resilient speculative development more profitable?
It's a very simple question. I'm going to start asking a minister, a government minister actually, because you mentioned changing building codes within Zambia, Minister. I mean, I wonder how far that goes to meet some of the sort of points that Aris is raising there.
I agree with him entirely. We have a situation where developers, as individuals, are building where rivers used to be, and when the water comes with the rainy season, the water has nowhere to go. It has to meander through all this concrete, and in the end we have flooded roads and flooded houses. So yes, I agree with you. I think it's just a question of enforcing policy, where the policy that you put into investment, if it involves infrastructure development, is thoroughly monitored. And somebody mentioned here the issue of corruption. Sometimes officials look the other way because they have a kickback, but at the end of the day, the result of a decision that's made wrongly affects the entire society. So it's just enforcement. I think the rules are there, they're embedded in policy, but the enforcement part of it is lacking. Zambia is a country where most of the investment that is attractive is in mining. We have mining companies that come there, and they focus more on making their profit rather than fulfilling the social corporate responsibility aspect. So that's why you hear about battling with the investors and, on the other hand, the government. But the policies are there. We just have an issue with implementation. And again, we need to have information readily available. So those who have money and interest in putting in research and development to see how we can mitigate the risk factor. Zambia is open to be used as a guinea pig, if you like, to research and see how best we can mitigate these issues. But otherwise, policy is of utmost importance, and it has to be accepted. It's a give and take situation. You can't just look at profit and not look at the damage that you're causing. So we have to work together on that.
Minister, thank you. Minister Santana, maybe you have an answer to the question.
Sí, gracias. Este es un asunto capital. La República Dominicana tiene muchos problemas, pero tiene la ventaja de que es una economía que ha venido creciendo mucho por bastante tiempo. Y en la medida en que eso ocurre, pues gran parte de la infraestructura pública y privada se va renovando y en consecuencia se van aplicando las técnicas más modernas. Como hace mucho tiempo que no somos víctimas de un fenómeno natural catastrófico, pues no sabemos exactamente hasta dónde será lo suficientemente resistente, porque por mucho que uno crea, mientras no se experimente el fenómeno, no sabremos hasta qué punto estamos preparados. Creo que se ha venido haciendo un esfuerzo y que la República Dominicana está mucho mejor preparado hoy que en décadas anteriores, y a ello ayuda mucho el hecho de que el desarrollo tecnológico nos permite desarrollar y aplicar mecanismos de alerta temprana, de que nos permite comunicar mucho mejor a la población las situaciones de riesgos, y también nos ayuda a garantizar el cumplimiento de las normas medioambientales y de seguridad que se han venido desarrollando. Claro está, no estamos suficientemente seguros porque sigue habiendo infraestructura, sigue habiendo edificaciones, sigue habiendo mucha vivienda informal, mucha vivienda y asentamientos humanos en lugares de mucho riesgo. Y aunque tengamos la normativa más adecuada o más rígida que podamos tener, no nos olvidemos que en América Latina somos estados débiles donde una buena normativa no necesariamente se aplica al pie de la letra, de modo que es posible que todavía hayan cosas que creemos que las hemos superado, pero que en la práctica no las hayamos superado. En quizás el aspecto que más avances hemos tenido es en sistemas de reconocimiento y evaluación rápida de impacto y sobre todo en mecanismos de prevención y de comunicación a la población para aliviar rápidamente situaciones de riesgo. Gracias.
Minister, thank you very much. It's a long haul, isn't it? Sandra, you wanted to
Yes.
work with private
Thank you,
sector.
Aris, for that very good question. And let me have an opportunity to really address these issues. But I would say that rather than telling the private sector, a business, you make lesser profit and more on the social environment, we have to let the business people or the private sector understand all the investment. Actually, if they don't address the ESG risk properly, and that is definitely will, as I mentioned, financially material, and definitely at the end, it will impact the performance and your investment or your business. So that is why we are emphasizing that we need to drive business ambition and innovation. Let them understand if we don't do it right, if we don't integrate the risk and all those elements into our investment, even the operation, at the end of the day, we are the one, not just less profit, we're probably out of business.
Yes, just proving long-term costs is better is a long-term game, isn't it? Which, of course, is still that short-termist problem. I'm going to move on, if that's all right, because I'm aware of the clock. Dale Sands. Dale, I believe you have a point you wanted to raise.
Yes, with so much competition for resources, particularly in Zambia, I was wondering, does disaster risk reduction really take its place where the priority that it deserves?
Yes, this is why we have set up what we call the Zambia Environmental commission, which is supposed to look at the issues of looking into the risk areas. Any investors who want to come and do business in Zambia has to fulfill certain environmental impact assessment activities. And it's at that point where once the investment has been accepted, the government agency is responsible for monitoring that. In the past, it has not been very effectively implemented, but the agency is there, and with the recent happenings in terms of climate change issues that have affected the country, it has now been enhanced and strengthened, and it's a question of education, both the public as well as the investors. And that's why we need to invest more in equipment that will give us the information that we can give to the would-be investor so that they are well informed, because they could be investing in a situation where they could lose all their investment because they do not have the information in as far as the risk element is concerned. So we're trying to manage the situation, hence the disaster risk management aspect. So yes, there is a factor from the policy side. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Now, I'm going to run the risk of offering this to the floor. We're very short on time. If anyone has a question rather than an intervention or a long statement, it would be very welcome. If we could get up there, thank you. Let us know who you are and where you're from.
Hi, my name is Daniela Sventevich. I'm from the Chilean delegation. I'm an academic from law, and I have a question, very point. First of all, I want to thank you all the exposition. It was very interesting, and also all the translators. They are doing an excellent job, so thank you very much. I want to know if you have any knowledge about some kind of tribute for building with the exposure to some threats, natural threats. If there are any country that have any kind of tribute of that kind.
I'm not sure if I've got you correctly, but in Zambia we do have settlements on the floodplains, and we've got a floating school, if you can understand what I'm saying, where construction is done on islands, which are very difficult to access because our water transport system is not very well developed. But communities are settled there and mostly engaged in farming issues, which has also brought us to the issue of the depletion of fish. So we are trying to look at aquaculture and helping those people who are settled in those floodplains, which are prone to flooding, and people are likely to lose their properties and everything should the water levels rise to the level of flooding. But we have done some investment, and we're doing floating kind of construction, which is working out quite well so far. I don't know if that addresses what you were asking.
It's a specific example, which I
Yes.
think is to the point. So
Yes.
Hopefully it does. Thank you very much indeed for that. We are up against the clock, so goodness, you're pushing me. Very brief question.
Thank you very much. My question is directed to the Honorable Minister of Zambia. And I would like to thank you for speaking of on DRR in Zambia. And it is very commendable that Zambia is speaking to all the disaster policy direction frameworks which fit into the national plan. However, entire areas in Zambia have been decimated and continue to be decimated by charcoal burning, by the charcoal burning industry. And with good trains filled twice a week delivering charcoal to the major urban areas. I would like to find out from you, Honorable Minister, whether anything has been done in terms of investments for alternative sustainable solutions to address this issue.
Minister.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, we are looking at alternative sources of energy, one of which is to introduce companies that have brought in the aspect of looking at solar energy, but specifically to address the issue of cutting down of trees to make charcoal. We have embarked upon a pilot project to grow bamboo, which can be used as an alternative. So where trees are being cut, we are encouraging replanting, and specifically the type of trees that will grow in a shorter period that can be used, and it becomes like an economic activity where people can also make money by selling that. So we do have programs like Plant a Million Trees that are going on. We are planting trees in schools, particularly of citrus type, so that the children at schools can have fruit as well as the tree to bring about the comfort of rainfall, which we are seeing disappear in areas where there's complete cut down of trees. So we do have a land policy that's looking at that issue of preserving the trees, and also looking into alternative energy kind of solutions by looking at other forms of energy beyond burning down of the indigenous trees, especially for charcoal use. So something is being done about that. Thank you.
Okay, Minister, thank you. I clearly have time management issues because we're down to the last 2 or 3 minutes. So what I'm going to do is just ask our panelists, really, in a sentence, a takeaway thought from what you've wanted to put out here today. And Hiroshi, I'm going to start from the far end, if I may, with you.
Well, thank you very much. Well, today I talked about the DRR, but I think space can also contribute to monitoring climate change. So, because, for example, we have launched satellites to monitor carbon dioxide, for example. And so what I would like to say is that space is not only for science, but also for DRR and also for SDGs. And finally, I hope that space data can contribute to decision-making on the ground, including investment and policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hans.
Yeah, I'd like to say thank you to UNDRR. I'm very glad they created RISE, which is the private sector representative to the UN. It has actually given the private sector a voice, and to, at the same time, also the private sector to hear and understand how public sector look and say about DRR. I can really say that the public sector and the private sector really has to work together. Public sector alone cannot solve the problem or resolve DRR. Neither does private sector itself can resolve DRR. They have to work together so they can succeed better. Okay, so as I would end the talk by saying, risk resilience and disaster preparedness makes good business sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Sandra.
Now there are clear mechanisms in place that force companies to pay attention to ESG values and the contribution to the SDGs. And yes, disaster risk reduction is included in there, but it is still hidden. Today, we are seeing as a world that climate change is increasing disaster risk, and our role as the private sector is to mainstream disaster risk into our business strategy as well as investment decision. And this is what the private sector here, why the private sector here and working with UNDRR, and it must keep on insisting. And to me, as a CEO, I know every investment decision I make will definitely make an impact to the world. It just matters good or bad. So I believe my contribution to DRR and the resilience is to ensure what we play our part through risk-informed investment and business strategy for better social and the environment outcome. And please, let's do it together to make a better impact to the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister.
Sí, gracias. Creo que un asunto que hay que destacar es que Al igual que la Agenda 2030 de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible, es un asunto que nos compromete a todos. Es una nave en la cual vamos todos y tenemos que evitar que se derrumbe. Algo parecido ocurre con la necesidad de estar preparados y poder evitar los riesgos que se derivan de las catástrofes naturales. Normalmente quienes más pierden son los pobres, los más afectados son los más pobres, pero no hay dudas de que esto es algo que puede afectar a cualquier persona, a cualquier sector social, incluyendo a los más poderosos empresarios. Estamos haciendo un esfuerzo por involucrar a toda la comunidad en estas cosas. Lamentablemente, una de las cosas que más enfatizan los estudios que se llevan a cabo sobre América Latina es la falta de confianza de la población en nuestras instituciones. Y eso se traduce no solo en falta de apoyo, sino en falta de cooperación y de respeto a las disposiciones institucionales, a las disposiciones de nuestros estados. Eso nos obliga a pensar seriamente en la necesidad de generar un clima de mayor confianza y particularmente de fortalecer nuestras instituciones.
Thank you, Minister. And Minister, last word.
Thank you very much. I think we can all attest to the fact that prevention is better than cure. And to everybody who has come to witness this session, I would like to appeal to all the cooperating partners, both international, continental, the business sector, to consider disaster risk reduction programs and activities in our country where both can coexist. Business to make a profit as well as taking care of the environment. It's possible, it can be achievable, so we need to look to have a win-win situation where we leave no one behind. I'd like to thank the UNDRR for facilitating this discussion, and I wish all of us the best as we go back.
Minister, thank you very much indeed for that. And as I thank the panel for their contributions, many thanks indeed for that, it just does feel like it's that balance between hard-headed business opportunity as much as social responsibility. I'm often reminded of, I went to Samoa a few years ago and spoke to people on the coast who'd been hit by a tsunami, who said, we are resilient people. And they had to be because everything around them wasn't. And I guess every incremental step towards improving the risk-informed investment in every part of the world has to be a strong positive thing. And as Sandra said, it's about speed, isn't it? And getting on with it. So, ladies and gentlemen, our panel, thank you very much indeed for your contributions. And to you for your questions and your attention, thank you very much indeed. That's the end of the session. Thank you.